and that he's worked on creatively, and well, lights, camera, action, they are off, and it's the king's pawn that has been deployed. And there is the unusual system, has been played before, but is very unusual at this level.
Yeah, so we don't often see White's bishop coming out, but nothing really seems to surprise Gukesh. He's such a hard worker. What amazes me about Gukesh is his maturity at this age. I remember when I was that age, I certainly wasn't as mature as this player. And we have an interesting position already where White has the two bishops, but if you look at White's pawns, they're maybe not ideal, and Black has more space in the center of the board. Richard, though, playing an aggressive move there, throwing the knight towards Gukesh's king.
And both players just seemingly reeling out those moves, indicating that they're both in their preparation. But this move has taken Gukesh by surprise. It's a bit of a weird and wonderful move because it's just the knight that is headed towards Black's king. And at first sight, it looks like it can be easily parried by developing the light square bishop or even kicking that knight away. So what is Richard's plan?
Well, there's a little trick here. Knight takes h7 is a big threat on the board, winning a pawn. So if Gukesh doesn't pay attention here, that knight move can go and take that pawn right on the right-hand side, followed by queen check. So this move, the move that Ivanka mentioned, our resident Nostradamus there. Thank you, Ivanka.
Thank you.
Always predict the right moves, being the great player you are. Stops that idea. Richard now using his rook. That's the advantage of having double pawns. It opens up more files for your rook, and the white rook is zoomy up the board, zooming towards a black pawn. Black doesn't defend that pawn, but kicks the knight away, and I expect that knight to centralize now. I kind of like what Richard's done here. I like the way he's played a rather different kind of opening. This is proper Richard, and this is why he's one of my favorite players to watch. You never know what to expect. You never know what openings he's going to play, but it's nearly always something imaginative, and he does centralize that knight, even though the computer maybe doesn't like that. The evaluation bar dropping a bit after that move.
And Gukesh now has some choices. You know, he can actually step back with that knight in the center and ask a question to the light square bishop. He can even try to harass the bishop in another way by moving the knight that's sitting on c6 and attack that bishop. But, well, he steps back with his knight, and I'm expecting Richard to preserve that bishop. That bishop is, after all, a fantastic piece, and he moves it forward. These guys, they are good. They're going after every single little advantage. Big threat of actually playing bishop takes knight and absolutely ruining the black pawn structure.
Yeah, look at the heart rate as well. Richard's had a high heart rate throughout. He's getting his workout today, 163. Gukesh, very calm player there. White can now do that damage to the pawns if he wants to, but maybe he doesn't want to rush that move. He just stabilizes his knight in the middle of the board, but more importantly, this allows the white queen to come to a very aggressive square. I like this move. The white queen wants to move in front of the white king, aiming at black's king and creating some threats. And this position has a lot of potential, but black has a good hold in the center. Pretty even at the moment, but hang a minute, I haven't even looked at the time, Ivanka. I've only just noticed that Gukesh has fallen asleep.
Well, he did just make a move there, retreating the bishop. I'm expecting this whole idea is that he wants to actually pick up the f-pawn and move it 2 squares, attack the knight in the middle of the board. Richard has to be careful because you don't want to find your knight trapped there in the middle. And yeah, Richard now pausing. He has his choice. He can continue with your plan of moving the queen. And wow.
Whoa, that is such a brave move, that one.
But it's ugly. It's ugly because it leaves some holes there for the black pieces to occupy. And Richard don't care, though.
He doesn't. I find sometimes the most beautiful things in life are actually ugly on the outside, and that move, it did look ugly because you open up your own king, and white's pawns are doing a very weird spider-like formation there, but it is that white knight in the center which looks pretty good. I mean, it's a very strange position though, and Gukesh playing excellent at the moment. He's not giving any weaknesses away. Very classical style of play from Gukesh here.
Yeah. He's going to get ready to reroute that knight on a very long journey and try to put it on the square that has now been left wide open on f4. So Richard's heart rate gone up to 159 and the clock is ticking down. It's also not really very easy to see a way for Richard to actually conduct something, and there comes the queens. Should Gukesh go into an endgame? And Gukesh says, I'll have that.
I'm surprised by the queen exchange. I thought Richard could move the queen the other way there and try to generate something on the king side. That seemed more his style. But this queen exchange is damage limitation from Richard, I feel. Now, black should be doing a little bit better here because he has no weaknesses and white's pawns are a bit funny later on, but still seems fairly even at this moment in time. The clock situation, not in Gukesh's favor.
Yeah, I'm actually going to say that I fancy black's chances because black has a nice plan. He can put his knight in the middle. There you go, Gukesh. And that knight will eye up two very powerful squares. He also has the potential of kicking back the rook. And take a look at the light square bishop. That is targeting a pawn, which must be overprotected. And that's why Richard steps up with his king.
Yeah, Gukesh just playing very sensible moves here. Both sides trying to gain a bit of space. But
Richard breaking the rules. Because the first thing that you're taught is when you are playing with bishops of opposite colors, you put your pawns on the square that is opposite to your opponent's bishop. And he's sat there and put them at the edge. And there you go.
He sacrificed a pawn, or has he just blundered a pawn there? Well, Richard is trying to get some dynamic play there by this pawn break. This is his idea. Gukesh just takes that pawn off the board, and Richard wants to try to get something going on the left-hand side of the board. I quite like this idea from Richard, because when your position's getting a little bit worse, but your opponent's short of time, you need to complicate things. And he is now trying to win his pawn back. That rook lined up against black's pawn. Black jumping in with the knight into the center of the board. I think Richard should eliminate this knight. It could get very dangerous otherwise. And I don't know. I'm kind of liking Richard's position now. I feel that his knight is a pretty good piece.
Yeah, I have to say, you know, I'm actually seeing a big turnaround in the position, and Gukesh finding a target to attack, and that's why he's concentrated his forces. But the knight can just step forward in the middle, and how are you going to rescue that rook?
Well, the problem is, I think black is losing. Black is winning a pawn here because the pawn in front of white's king is in a lot of trouble. How do you defend that? Maybe there's a clever way. They're both under 20 seconds now. The knight attacks the rook, and there goes that pawn. So Gukesh going a pawn up, and his rooks look very scary to me. Maybe Richard is still okay, though.
Yeah, I mean, both sides with their trumps there, and well, Richard winning a pawn back. And now the rook is there on the second row. I have a suspicion that this game might fizzle out after all the adventure into a draw.
It might well do. They've both now got equal material on the board. They're both very short of time. There's a lot of play left in this position. Which is better, the knight or the bishop? I prefer Richard's pawns, because if he starts pushing them, they're further away from black's king, so the black king will find it harder to stop them from queening. And I quite like Richard's knight in the center of the board there. If I was going to pick a color here, I'd certainly pick the white side, but are they going to repeat positions?
Yeah.
It looks very likely.
No, Richard says no. Instead, he pushes his pawns, and look at this. It is a race with both sides advancing their pawn majorities.
Indeed, and
3,
Richard
2.
just seemed... Oh, he had 1 second left with that move. Phenomenal that he managed to get that in on time. Whose pawns are going to be quicker? And this move, okay, is looking like we're going to get lots of liquidations. But Richard is actually going to go a pawn up now. So Gukesh under some pressure here. There is the pawn up with check. And can he queen that pawn, Richard? Very scary position for Gukesh, this.
Very scary. And just 5 seconds on the clock for Gukesh, and you see the way that Richard is playing, going backwards with the king. And now we're in a rook and pawn ending, and not all rook and pawn endings are drawn. And I'm expecting Richard to drop back with the rook.
Winning.
This looks like it's winning, and now he can get behind his own passed pawn. Get that rook behind the pawn.
Or he can move his king forwards as well. Both of these look good. You can support the pawn with your king, and this is an extra pawn for Richard. And he is now getting a bit greedy. He's going to win a second pawn, I think, Jovanka. This is just winning for Richard. Okay, he's not going for that pawn, but that is going to be a queen. That pawn will be a queen. It's 2 squares away from queening. And this is not going to work. Gukesh in a world of pain here.
Yeah, and there's no way that pawn can be prevented from queening.
And they're off now, so Gukesh has the advantage of the white bits, and he's got to try and get a win in this game. If Gukesh doesn't get a win, he is out of the competition. This is the stage we're at now. And for that reason, Richard picking quite a solid setup. He threw his bishop in with a check, and he's now just trying to keep some control of the center of the board. And so far, quite normal play. Both sides need to get their knights, bishops out, control the center, get castle. Those are the three basic rules in the opening that everyone should be doing. Control the center with your pawns, get your knights and bishops out, get your king safe. And this position has been seen a number of times before.
And, well, Gukesh, listening to your advice there, Simon, and the king is certainly castled, and the rook now steps forward to get ready for the opening in the middle of the board.
Yeah, and this is just the kind of position probably both sides will be quite happy with. Gukesh, because all the pieces remain on. Remember, to win, you need to be able to keep complications alive. But Richard has a solid structure, not too many weaknesses. He's making way for his knight to go back to where that rook was placed, so his knight can help defend his king. And this is really going to heat up very soon, I feel, especially in the middle game. Gukesh will maybe move his light square bishop and put his queen where his light square bishop is. There's many different maneuvers that white can try here because he has a bit more space in the position, a little bit easier for Gukesh to play.
Yeah, and there we see Richard just setting up a pawn formation that I call the wall. And maybe he's going to be thinking about rerouting the bishop actually to the square in front of his own king, getting it on the long diagonal. And Gukesh taking a pause here, thinking about how he can proceed. It's not that easy for white to generate play, especially if black keeps on maintaining control on the center. And, well, he's come up with a knight maneuver. And will Richard just continue with his plan of putting that bishop on the long diagonal? Yes.
So we're in that maneuvering stage of the game where, as Jovanka said, they're just trying to get their pieces to decent squares. And that bishop getting out of the way, maybe for white's rooks here. And this is the kind of position that just sort of heats up, and then explodes like popcorn. A popcorn position, I feel. You put it in the microwave and suddenly, bang, it goes everywhere. And I don't know, who's it going to explode in favor of? I'm not sure. And that's why you need to put your pieces in the best position for when it does open up, for when you get those explosions. And they're both doing that at the moment. But it's quite hard to keep finding useful moves in such a position.
Yeah, for both sides, actually. You know, we just saw Gukesh centralize the rook, and now, well, Richard is planning to set up a battery there on the long diagonal, get the queen behind its own bishop and put pressure on the knight. And the big question for Gukesh is, what can he do to improve his position? Is he going to step forward with the h-pawn? Is he going to relinquish control in the center? What can he do? And the answer is not easy at all.
And that bishop might also pop out to the queen side and attack white's rook. I really like that move. In these positions, you just find anything that improves your position a little bit. Gukesh, I know his heart rate's not high, but it's higher than it normally is. It's normally under 100. And I think he's feeling a bit of pressure here. Remember, he has to win this game. And now Richard breaking that tension by capturing in the middle.
Yeah, but the big question is, if you try to capture with the pawn, which is what Gukesh would have wanted, the black bishop would have come out to the h6 square on the right and actually pinned the two rooks.
Very nice idea there by Richard, because now he has this beautiful square for his knight. That knight that's just moved there can never be kicked away by a white pawn. And if we look at the pawn structure, Richard simply has a better pawn structure than Gukesh. So this is getting quite tough for Gukesh. Richard playing a brilliant game today, fighting well in that first game. And here he's playing tactical and positional, a masterpiece so far.
Yeah, I mean, he's really showing a masterclass here. And Gukesh just forced to keep moving his pieces. And, well, Gukesh says now or never. Let's push forward with the h-pawn.
Off we go.
But it might be a bad idea, because what is that pawn doing, especially as it gets stopped?
Well, at some point, you just got to press the turbo button, and I think that's what Gukesh is doing. We have some more exchanges, but Gukesh is trying to find a way into Black's king side. The problem is Black's pieces are so well positioned. That rook taking the open file, threatening to capture White's queen. Black's knight on the left-hand side, it's beautifully positioned. The bishop on the left-hand side, controlling a square that White's rook wants to go to. Black must be better here. If Richard can keep control, then he's gonna go through to the next round.
Yeah, and Gukesh just forced to shuffle the pieces around, and Richard's, well, he is in control. What is he going to do? Jump forward with a knight? Is he going to initiate a set of trades? Is he perhaps going to advance a pawn on the left side of the board? No, instead he goes for that plan of improvement. This is good strategy.
And Gukesh really needs to start generating some play. I like that last move from Gukesh. Throw some pieces towards your opponent's king. But how is he going to open up Richard's king? It's not clear. He probably needs to use a pawn at some moment, but he hasn't really got any pawns that can do anything. He's offering some exchanges, but as we know, the more exchanges that are made, the more drawish it becomes. That favors Richard because he only needs that draw to go through to the next round. The rooks now come off. You have to take that one, and then I expect Black can even try to exchange queens here. But Richard playing a semi-aggressive move, moving his knight and trying to exchange the bishops now. Now his bishop in front of his king is looking at White's bishop. He just wants to make exchanges, exchange off those bad pieces.
And Gukesh saying, no, let's keep the tension on the board. Technically, I don't think it's the best move, but on the other hand, when you have so little time on the clock, what can you do? And this is one of the big problems. Richard can simply pin the bishop, and well, no pieces are getting traded off without a trade of queens, and Richard playing perfect chess.
And we see that knight, though, being exchanged. And I have to say, that knight was one of Black's best pieces. And the evaluation bar also agrees that maybe that wasn't Richard's best try. And it's 2 knights versus 2 bishops. So far in this competition, we have seen the knights dominate, which is a bit strange because bishops are considered better. Do you prefer knights or do you prefer bishops? I have to say here, I actually quite like the knights, Jovanka, but it could be on the clock here as well.
Oh, I like in the bishops, you know, because the problem is that knights don't have any good targets. Because if you grab one of those pawns, well, the power of the bishops get unleashed. And look at that. Richard opening up the position, and Gukesh just 9 seconds on the clock.
Wow, 9 seconds to try and get a win out this position. Can Richard just save everything, keep everything under control? He's on a bit of the defensive at the moment, and his bishops are simply guarding the pawns. You've got to get your king into the game in the ending. That's why we see the king starting to move. Very complicated for 7 seconds, though. This is one of those positions that you could easily blunder, and more pawns coming off. That's got to favor Richard. Remember, he only needs a draw in this position. Richard does have an extra 30 seconds as well. That's got to be useful. Those bishops coming to life a bit more as well now.
I know this was the big problem with getting greedy and capturing material. And Richard quickly spotting a very nifty counterattack. And now it's not 2 pairs of bishops, but instead it's a bishop against a knight. And the Black King is so well placed in the center. And decision time. Do you capture with a pawn and allow Gukesh an outside pass pawn? Well, luckily for Richard, he has a long-range piece that can act as a defender.
But at least from Gukesh's point of view, he has a passed pawn now. Remember, in the ending, you need to get a queen. I think Gukesh has the advantage here. Definitely. He's got 1 pawn nearest to us that can just keep running up the board at some stage. If Gukesh can get his king in, he's going to be doing well. But his pawns are also on dart squares. Black has a dart square bishop, so they're always going to come under some attack. It's not going to be easy, is it?
It's certainly not going to be easy for Gukesh.
Here it comes.
Well, he's trying, but the Black King has that pawn under lock and key.
You've got to try, though.
He's got to push. I thought he was actually going to take the pawn, but he can't.
And he's trying to attack the bishop here. I'm not sure where else that knight's going to go. Maybe come in with a check. Richard just moving the bishop away. And the knight comes back with 1 second again.
Whoa. Okay, and Richard calculating very quickly that he can go into this king and pawn ending. That is very risky because the White King is active.
Yeah, I think Richard is okay here because he always has a pawn break. And if anything, I think it's Richard who is now better. He has the extra
1 second
pawn,
and he's lost on time.